Very good morning to you on this Friday morning. It is the 8th of August, and if you've joined us, you have reached the fifth connection, a channel given to the Ephesian experiment, where we are talking through the storyline of the book of Ephesians. It's a letter, it's a missive that was sent to a believing community in the first century by the Apostle Paul, with the intent that this group of followers of the way get in sync, get into line, become adjusted to what God was doing in their midst. The word is synchronicity, when you come into sync, when you align with what God does. And the believing community is the assembly of God. That's what ecclesia is. The word was used of political gatherings of all sorts. And it's a term applied to those who are followers of the way. Remember, 9 times across the book of Acts, believers, disciples of Christ, are described as followers of the way. Only 3 times across the New Testament is the word Christianoi used. Christianoi is a reference to men and women who were little Christ, little Christs. It was a pejorative term to ridicule and poke fun at those who were followers of the way. And so across the 115 verses of 2 acts, Act 1 and Act 2 of the book, of the storyline, the writer is tracking the points of synchronicity where God, the people of God, and events in reality coincide. And then from chapter 4 to chapter 6 of the story, prompts for synchronicity, because all of the New Testament under grace are prompts that goad us into a direction to take action. Because it's one thing to say you believe stuff. You can have it all in your head, but you could fall dead short of living it because of a misunderstanding that belief is embodied. Faith is an embodied encounter with the risen Lord. It's not just a head encounter. All of you is involved in processes, in perspectives, and in participation of what we call dispositional knowing. It's not just being able to rehearse 10 points of the content of a statement of faith. That's black ink on white paper. The thing is, are you embodying that? Is that in your life? That's where the scriptures lands. The embodiment of truth. It's a very Western Greek kind of thing to purely have things in your head and say you know it. The Hebraic model has to do with embodying truth. I'll give you an example of that. Deuteronomy chapter 5, all the way through to Deuteronomy 11. Each of the chapters is prefaced by this idea. These things, these laws, these statutes, these commands, these ordinances have been written in order that you may know, so that you may do. That's the wisdom model. Knowing means doing. You cannot say you know a thing according to a Hebraic wisdom model and say that's the be all and end all. It is embodying that truth. It is living it out in the warp and woof of daily life. And so as we get back into this text, let's look at where we are. We are in chapter 2, right? Chapter 2 is the chapter that rehearses the plan of God, how God moves us to vitality, how God moves us from mortality to vitality. First 3 verses talks about you and I being separated from the life of God. Our lives were given to fragmentation and disorientation. disorder was what characterized our lives in relation to the source of all being. And who is he? He's none other than the God of the universe, the one in whom we live and move and have our being. And so he moves us from mortality rather, to vitality in the first 3 verses. And then in the next couple of verses, he talks about how God has brought us to life, into vital connection with the source of all being. He's brought us into connection with himself. But that connection is not just a willy-nilly thing. It has intentionality to it. Reality flows with vitality and intentionality. In other words, it is going somewhere. You will notice on the chart that the assembly is an amoebic modality. An amoeba is a single-celled organism. We are all amoebas inside of this entity called the assembly. We are alive. The assembly is a modality, a mode of existence which is real and moves in fidelity to the flow of reality. And that reality exists inside of God. There's nothing that exists outside of him. And so we're going to look at this aspect of intentionality, going from verse number 8 to verse number 10. And if you look at the schematic that I have, you will notice that intentionality has to do with being and becoming purposefully inside of that modality. We are living with purpose. We aren't just being something, but we are becoming something. God hasn't called us to sit, soak, and sour. He's called us into vital reunion, union with him, where we are constantly becoming. We are constantly transforming. Romans 8 talks about conforming to the image of Christ. You and I, as it were, are the digital plates. And as the photographic images of Christ fall on the digital plates of our hearts, they become ingrained in our lives. And they are part of our transformation. But God uses the ebb and flow of life to achieve that transformation. And if that doesn't dawn on you, then you need to figure that out pretty quickly. That life has ebbs and flows to it. There are times when things seemingly go very well, a smooth run, and all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose in our lives or upon our lives, and everything seems to go out of kilter. As when a car swerves out of control. You have the steering wheel in your hands, but you cannot control the vehicle. The car swerves uncontrollably from one side of the road to the other. And oh, how we like to be in control of our lives. Because you see, men and women, our default setting, listen to me now, our default setting is control. We don't only want to control our lives, we want to control other people's lives. And now I'm talking about inside the family of God. God has never created us to be controlled by other human beings. That does not mean to say he's not placed checks and balances in our lives, that he has not given us guardrails within which we need to function and according to which we need to function. But please understand that he's the one who is in control over all of life. Now, let's go into the text and let's see what the writer says about this thing called intentionality. Because if God has saved us for a purpose and with a purpose, then What purposes are in view in the flow of reality? How do being and becoming coalesce? How do they live together in identity transformation? Well, here it is, verse 7. God has raised us up and seated us in the heavenly places according to verse number 6. And now in verse 7, the text goes on to say, so that in the coming ages, with the purpose for the following, so that in the coming ages he, God, might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness toward us in Christ. Now your tongue almost gets tied when you read that in the English language. So that he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in the context of his kindness toward us. Here's another way of looking at it. So that in real time and in untimed time, what's the coming ages got to do with? The vistas of undefined duration. Undefined duration. The coming ages. That God might show in the coming ages that he might display what? Our undeserved inclusion without conditions. That's the immeasurable riches of his grace. Our undeserved inclusion into the family of God without conditions. You are saved by grace through faith plus nothing. You are kept by grace through faith plus nothing. That's what grace is. And that's why this concept of grace is so open to misunderstanding. We constantly are adding adjectives to this noun. The noun is grace. We are constantly given to adding adjectives. Byvoeglike naamwoorde. We talk about saving grace. We talk about living grace. We talk about dying grace. As if God is an inept communicator and doesn't communicate very well. So we have to add these descriptors to these words. Well, just stick with the context, because the book is talking about the assembly of God, and what synchronicity inside of the assembly looks like when God and his people encounter life and living. What my life ought to look like when I come in sync with God and the people of God and reality. So this grace operates unspent. Talks about the riches of his grace. When you and I tap into that reservoir and we dive into that reservoir, we will never hit the bottom. Because his grace is greater than our failures. It's deeper than the deepest sea, higher than the heavens above. Wide, wide as the ocean. And that grace operates unspent in bringing you and I from death to life in the appointed one. Again, he's the Christ, the appointed one. This grace functions in according to the kindness of God. Just think of what kindness is, an act of mercy, a merciful act. It's a conspiracy of kindness. We don't deserve it, but he gives it. I don't deserve it, but you give it. You don't deserve it, but I give it in spite of. And God brings us from death to life in the appointed one who embodies the way. He is the Christ, the way of total identity transform. So, how are you showing this morning that you have submitted yourself or ourselves to the transforming grace of God? Well, when we start living out our potential, because God has created you with great potential. He's put his very life into you. Don't you think that's potential? Potentiality is what you have the possibility of becoming. All of us are in a state of becoming. Now, you may not like my descriptors of when I say you are becoming a better second self. If any man be in Christ, he is a new self. He is a new creation. All things are passed away. What things? The context of 5:17, the story talks about selfishness, selfish ambition, which focuses on me only, but doesn't have a focus on him. When I start tapping into my limitless potential because of his life in me, it's amazing where I could land. Are you living out your usefulness on planet Earth? And you may say, I'm sick. I'm all bent over. The force of gravity has taken its toll on my physical being because I'm all bent over. Yeah, some of us are a little older and we're starting to bend towards the ground now. And for all that is worth, am I still living life to the hilt? Enjoying every moment of it? You say, what? That ain't possible. Life is a sour, bitter pill. Look what God has thrown me. He's thrown me a lemon. He's thrown me a curveball. How in the world do I get through all of this? We have a family member at the moment who is living in the depths of pain, on morphine at the moment, and doesn't have long to go. And that's a challenge. When you cannot say how much time you have because your life is starting to ebb away. You're starting to eat less. You're starting to walk less. Your mental functions are going. How in the midst of that do I live out my full potential? Well, that's a challenging question. But it has something to do with understanding the immeasurable riches of God's undeserved conclusion of me into his family because of who Christ is. And in spite of what life throws, I am still living out his purposes to perform. Because God is the only one, as my friends in the south of Texas would say, God is the only one who can hit a straight blow with a crooked stick. And oh, what crooked sticks we are. I can live out God's purpose for me. I can live out God's potential that he has placed in my life. Because being and becoming purposefully happens in the flow of reality. It happens inside of what is really real. God doesn't call you to make as if. God doesn't call you when. God doesn't call you in spite of. Well, he actually calls you in spite of. Doesn't call you if. It doesn't call you because of. Doesn't call you when. He calls you in spite of you to be something and to become something. A tuning fork. Let me close with this illustration. Tuning fork is a very interesting instrument. And as kids going through primary school, we had a music teacher. His name was Mr. Pale. And Mr. Pale used to come into the music class at the end of the day when everybody was quite tired. And he would come in with a very strange looking instrument called a tuning fork. But this is a wonderful instrument because he would tap the tuning fork on the table and he would hum a note because the tuning fork had a pitch to it because of its shape and its length. That particular tuning fork was tuned to middle C. And oh, it was always fun when you would hum a middle C with perfect pitch because he brought his voice, his vocals, into attunement with the tuning fork. Is your life in attunement with God's tune this morning? God's tune for your life is playing out a song in your life and through your life. Now you can sing out of tune with him in your life and living. But oh, to be in sync with how he is playing his tune, because God doesn't waste a hit with those who leave or allow him to paint his story with their lives. He doesn't waste a hit. He uses the hits, the ups and the downs in our life to paint the story he's unfolding. And to live in sync with his story is what it's about. It's about intentionality, living in attunement with what he is doing. And today you're going to have opportunities to come into sync, to get in tune with what he's doing. Or have you already said, well, I don't need this, and I don't need this, and I don't need this, and on second thoughts, I don't need God. Or just take a break, just wait here. Just need to do a couple of things. I'll check in with you later. Rather than understanding that he's the one who is in control over our lives. Are we allowing that control to imbibe, to seep into, to permeate our lives? I trust that as you walk with God this morning, that you would have a good encounter with him, an attuned encounter with him. Goodbye for now and have a good day.